let's talk about defensiveness and the ways that you can evaluate if someone is feeling defensive or if you are feeling defensive. The first thing that you will see when someone is being defensive is frustrated body language. So this usually means that the person is closing themselves off to the speaker, whether it is by looking away or making themselves very small or crossing their arms over each other. That is usually the first indication of defensiveness within a person that you can see physiologically. Next, vocally. So ways that you can evaluate whether someone is being defensive vocally is if you hear certain phrases. First, if the response to the feedback that they are receiving begins with the word but, that's probably a good sign that they're about to be defensive. Another is that their response to the criticism just involves criticizing someone else's work. So if you say, oh, but Molly's work was way worse than mine, that would be a sign of defensiveness. And finally, and most obviously, when someone says, I'm not being defensive, but, then you know they're being defensive. Finally, psychologically. And this is mostly a way to understand if you yourself are being defensive. First, a voice in your head starts running through a list of reasons why this negative feedback is totally untrue. If you recognize that you are receiving feedback and you've completely tuned out, chances are pretty high that you're being defensive. Finally, if you recognize that you are smiling and nodding and just praying and wishing that it will all be over, you are probably being defensive. So, now that we can recognize the signs of whether we are being defensive or whether someone else is being defensive that we are giving feedback to, how do we de-escalate situations where someone is being defensive? So let's first talk about when you recognize that you are being defensive. So you want to try and find the truth, the nuggets that are going to help you move forward in the future instead of focusing on all of the information or comments that are given on the periphery. Now that we talked about what to do when you're receiving feedback, let's talk about what we do when we're giving feedback. Initially, when you are giving feedback and you recognize that the person you are giving feedback to is getting defensive, the first thing you can do is elaborate. Oftentimes when you are giving feedback, you may think that you are giving all the details, but the person receiving the feedback may want more information. And that's completely fair of them to ask for. If you recognize that you are giving feedback and the person is being defensive, then you might narrow down the feedback and talk about one action that the person can make in order to move forward and be productive following this conversation. Finally, it's important that you are deliberate and empathetic. So if you recognize that someone is feeling defensive, it means that they're feeling hurt. And you need to work through that with them. If you are giving feedback, and you are giving it in a way that shows them that you care about them as a person and their performance, then they will feel so much more likely to leave that situation and make those behavioral changes than if they feel just simply attacked or that you're not feeling empathetic for them at all in this feedback scenario. Let's talk about an activity. For this activity, I'm going to give an example of a student responding to the feedback they received from their professor. What I want you to do is imagine that you are able to talk to this student after they tell you about the feedback they received, and I want you to try and help them find constructive things within the feedback to help them move forward and be productive and effective in the future.
I don't know, dude. So I just got my speech back, my grade came in, and I thought I did friggin' amazing, right? Like I was up there, killed it, didn't even stutter any of that. And then I look at the paper and he docked me down for all this stuff that he said is like wrong. So apparently I didn't like verbally cite any of my sources or something, and I hit some steps too soon. He didn't even lecture about any of this stuff. Like, he lectured for one freaking day, that was it, didn't even elaborate. So I just don't get why the hell he's docking me down for all this stuff when he's not even doing his job correctly.